The subject now is Gavin Ortlund's misinformation on icons in church history. I'll be in the background. I'll be listening, but I want you to take over as the Spirit fills you. We want to know the truth because it's misinformation from people like Gavin Ortlund. At that time was James White that made me hate the ancient traditions and kept me away because I trusted their scholarship. This has to end because Gavin Ortlund cannot be another James White misleading people. May the Lord protect the flock from misinformation. So, guys, I want to recede. You.
Awesome. Oh, thrilled to be here. We've got a good amount to look at, so it'll be fun. But let me begin by noting that Subdeacon Daniel, so that you may be aware, towards the end of Gavin's video, he does say that he would like to dialogue with a representative of the Oriental Orthodox Church. Now, I want to ask you live on the air, would you be willing to go on his channel and dialogue with him over this topic?
I would love to. I think he might have maybe a misconception of me. I've never met him. I think I'm a charitable guy.
Definitely.
Talk about
No, I agree. I think you're very charitable. No, yes, without a doubt. Let me start the discussion off by this, and then I've got a bunch of timestamps here. We'll look at a bunch of early church fathers. People might be disappointed that a couple of ecclesiastical figures are not going to have a lot of time dedicated to them. That being because I don't know anybody part of any apostolic church that venerates Eusebius. I could be incorrect there. Maybe Subdeacon Daniel's aware, and I don't know of any other that venerate Tertullian. Most definitely, especially Eusebius, whom I was reluctant in putting his name on the Creed of Nicaea. A number of problems with him. Tertullian, of course, is not a saint in any church, and we know Origen is not one either. There are a number of responses that I have put out on my channel on those, but we want to look at early church fathers today. Let me just double check with you, Subdeacon. You all do not venerate Eusebius either, do you?
That's correct. We don't.
Gotcha. Are you aware of any apostolic church that venerates him?
No. So I think there was some misconception on Wikipedia that thought the Eusebius that we venerate was that one. It's not.
Right.
There's another Eusebius that we venerate.
And I think Wikipedia corrected that. I think.
Okay, good.
Yeah, because I remember that was there. But anyway, right back to the point. One really important thing we will deal with today, and I think the audience are in for a major fun treat, is we're going to look at in a little bit the Council of Elvira as well. It is not an ecumenical council for any of us, but I know the argument that Gavin Ortlund puts forth, James White and others, that, well, who cares if it's ecumenical or not? It is an example of an early church council that condemned iconography. You all have a major problem, so we're going to deal with that. As far as I'm aware, nobody has ever dealt with it the way we're going to deal with it today. So everybody, invite people in. You're in for a major, major treat. But I want to start off by one other thing we hear very often, Subdeacon, and it is one that is quite interesting. We hear it so often that before leading up to the Second Council of Nicaea, there really was never any of this kind of veneration of images, utilization of images. It just really wasn't there. Once you get to Second Nicaea, it begins to develop before it. It blows up by the time you get to Second Nicaea. Before it wasn't there. That is a quite interesting claim because as far as I know, the Oriental Orthodox were not present there at the Second Council of Nicaea, were they?
No, we weren't.
So that's a problem for people making this claim, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. What is the view of the images within Oriental Orthodoxy? And this is important because I want to be very clear for the audience. I'm a Catholic. My brother, Subdeacon Daniel, a dear friend of mine, is Oriental Orthodox. We're both part of apostolic churches, apostolic traditions, and we're on the same page when it comes to this. So the idea that Second Nicaea is where this really exploded, and you don't have it before, it's a big problem. What do you do with the Oriental Orthodox?
Yeah, so I think any student of this subject should be fascinated with why Oriental Orthodox have icons. Like where does because we didn't have the reaction against icons in order to have a council for icons, like the Chalcedonian tradition did. Same thing with the Catholics, in that they have Trent to be the Counter-Reformation Council, like that, particular areas dealing with particular things. In Oriental Orthodoxy, there wasn't an iconoclasm in the first place. So the what's the word? The emphasis on icons was never needed, because there wasn't the anti-icon side anyway. So it's a primitive view of icons. Like if you see in the Coptic church, maybe it's closer to a Byzantine type of iconography.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas with the Syriacs, and this is the thing with Oriental Orthodoxy, is very diverse modes of expression of faith. So in Syriac Orthodoxy, iconography is not a part of like the liturgical theology, but it's there. It's in mostly, if you find, especially in the early centuries, you'll find the majority of Syriac icons to be within gospel manuscripts. That's where you find the icons, instead of on the architecture in the churches. Like iconostasis, you won't find that in the Syriac churches, whether Syriac Orthodox or Assyrian Church of the East, both. We have the curtain instead. So it's a more primitive understanding, a less conformed, not conciliar understanding of how icons are to be accepted. But there's no time ever in Oriental Orthodoxy where people came out and said we shouldn't have icons or something. It was always part of the faith, and we always kept it how we received it as part of the faith, in a diverse mode of expression, in communion with each other, with no problems one with the other side. You know?
This is interesting, because this is a pretty strong statement, and I wrote it down. You know what? Let me play the video, because the last time we did a video, and I quoted from my phone from Gavin Ortlund, we shredded his arguments, and I made one mistake. I confused Cameron Bertuzzi and Gavin Ortlund, and he did a kind of like a marathon run of celebration, as if, well, everything else that we did and everything else we rebutted goes out the window because I confused him for Cameron Bertuzzi. So I'm not going to do that today. I'm not going to make that kind of an error so that he doesn't dismiss everything else we say. By the way, I want to be very clear. Northern Waters, Michael Lofton, I have not seen his stream, so in order to be very fair, I cannot comment on that. But we have no problem, Daniel, Subdeacon Daniel and myself, saying that the very roots of veneration, of utilizing images in worship, is a very biblical concept. You find it in the Old Testament. You find the roots of it there. And we have no problem saying the very roots of it are biblical, and it later then flourishes and becomes much more evident as the church grows and blossoms. There's no problem with that, but the very roots of it are biblical. How else would you explain Ezekiel 41 and the temporal imagery? Your thoughts on that, Subdeacon?
Right, exactly. So maybe, and I haven't seen Michael's stream either, but maybe what I'm guessing that he's talking about would be the Nicaea II kind of veneration of icons.
Very well could be.
But like I just explained, within Oriental Orthodoxy, if you go to the Coptic church, the way they venerate icons will look very different than in the Syriac church, how icons are venerated. Maybe for me, I'll open a gospel and there's an icon and I will kiss that icon that's in the gospel. Whereas for them, they have an iconostasis and they sense the icons, something that a lot of Syriac parishes don't have, So maybe that in that sense of a development of how a formal way of veneration of icons versus a more primitive, decentralized way, like you said, William, in the Old Testament, where I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think God tells them to like put angels on the curtain, in the temple, and then obviously the covenant and things like that. So the development that Northern Waters is talking about, I think it's an imperial context, not in a kind of decentralized overall way.
Right. Yeah. And to be very clear, when I did a show with the scholar that Dr. Ortlund brings up, the Reverend Dr. Price, who, by the way, I disagree with a lot in what Father Price has to say. Father Price at one point in the show, and people can watch it in my channel. At one point in the show, I talk about this developing the exact way you're talking about it, Subdeacon. And Father Price stopped me and said, okay, but we need to clarify for the audience that when we talk about development, we don't mean mutation. We don't mean that this just propped up sometime in history. So that is a very, very important distinction there. Let me put on that and by the way, we're going to look at a lot of really important quotes today, but there is let me pop up the video. This is Gavin Ortlund's video. And let me look at
a couple of issues that just by them are enough for me.
There we go. Okay. So the timestamp, this is interesting because it's about to lead us into reading patristics when he makes a very interesting comment here. And it's right around, there we go.
Is in fact the universal, resounding witness of the early church and the scripture. Christ, Eastern Orthodox Church, anathematizes to hell those who reject icon veneration. Now, some will want to say, well, the anathemas aren't the infallible part of the council. That's debated. Fine. Leave that. Let's grant that. The point remains. Now, here's the shocking truth that is just amazing. The position anathematized at Nicaea II as a damnable heresy is, in fact, the universal, resounding witness of the early church and the scripture.
That is a shocking statement. And I'm glad that I was able to play that because I was going to read it off of my paper. And my paper was not as forceful as him. For him to claim that, and I want to be very clear, Subdeacon Daniel, even though he may not view Second Nicaea as an ecumenical council, the statements they say on images, he would be in full agreement on. And what the council fathers say against those that were against images, the idea that that was a universal, overwhelming consensus in the early church and biblically, Subdeacon Daniel, that's a shocking statement. You would then, correct me if I'm wrong here, Subdeacon, I don't want to, be putting too much into this, but if that was the case, then you would really have just anti-image theology in the fathers overwhelmingly, right?
Right. Again, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, William, I think this kind of resistance to veneration of icons, it's kind of strange in that maybe it comes from this Western kind of mindset of a kind of, it's almost like a revolutionary way of thinking against the monarchy or disobedient or rebellion, because if you think about it, like even our dads in the East, we kiss their hand. And then that's a kind of veneration. And then so then that's bigger for the priests or the bishops, the patriarch. So then when we have relics of saints from the earliest periods of time of Christianity, and the relics of saints are images of those saints who we love, or Christ himself. So then we venerate the picture of any image of Christ or a relic of a saint or whatever. This is iconography too. These guys are thinking the modern iconostasis and the censor. That's fine. But you have to think what iconography entails altogether, the general understanding of all of these things are icons. So have we been venerating icons from the beginning? Absolutely we have. Polycarp's martyrdom. What happened after they stabbed him to death and burned? They stabbed him. Or I think they burned him. He didn't die. And they stabbed him until he died. So then the Christians came and they took his relics away. Why would they do that? Paul with his napkin and Peter with his shadow and that kind of stuff, So
those are great examples. Really good examples. Yeah.
I'm not sure why there's such a kind of strong Western resistance to this.
In my opinion, and I really truly believe this. In my opinion, it is a matter of really keeping alive one of the rallying cries of the Reformation. I cannot see any other logical reason because earlier I talked about even passing over Tertullian, but and not to defend him, because we don't view him as an early church father, but Tertullian condemns images. But even Tertullian viewed images as acceptable, such as a bronze serpent and other imagery in Scripture. So if you're going to just fall in line with all kind of imagery being negative, I think you have a big problem there. Now, I'm not saying Gavin does take that position, but he really does lean towards, to my opinion, absurdity in claiming that this was the position of the unanimously in the early church. I think he's going to find a major problem with that.
William, correct me if I'm wrong too. Isn't there somewhere in the Old Testament they're carrying a dead man and then they drop him on the bones of Elisha, the prophet?
Yeah.
Second Kings, chapter 13, 20 to 21. 2 Kings 13, 20 to 21.
Yeah.
They threw the body of the dead man, touched the bones of Elisha, and he came to life. And that's also in Joshua 7:6, where Joshua and the elders fell before the Ark of the Covenant, fell before it, the Ark of the Covenant, and on it goes. And then if you go to Acts 5, 14 and 16, and Acts 19, 11 and 12, their handkerchief and the shadows of the apostles would bring about healing and so on and so forth. But go ahead.
Yeah,
that's it. Like if you have a bones of a prophet raising a dead man, okay, you're going to say it's the power of God. Yes, the power of God through the bones of the prophet. Sure. Yeah. So then why can't we venerate these?
Yeah, and that's a big problem. Now here's the interesting thing that we're gonna look at. Because we're told these very interesting things of this being the unanimous testimony of the early fathers, now of the early church and of Scripture. Now we've mentioned numerous things of Scripture. The other thing that we mentioned, Ezekiel 41, the idealized temple vision there, where there's carved images of angels within the church and around the nave, and then we've got King Solomon's temple. I mean, there's so many examples. You'll hear the canard, the other argument, which, by the way, they grabbed from Francis Turretin and his boys, that, well, you know what, images is only acceptable when God commands it to be made. There's no examples of imagery being made without God's command. They're wrong about that. There's many other examples too. But if the early church was so anti-imagery, St. Gregory of Nyssa really, by the way, who is a great defender of the Trinity, says God's temple is brightly adorned with magnificence and is embellished with decorations, pictures of animals which masons had fashioned with delicate silver figures. It exhibits images of flowers made in the likeness of the martyr's virtues. His struggles, sufferings, the various savage actions of tyrants, assaults, that fiery furnace, the athlete's blessed consummation, and the human form of Christ presiding over all these events. They are like a book, skillfully interpreting by means of colors which express the martyr's struggles and glorify the temple with resplendent beauty. Now, we can go on and on reading this whole thing because there is so much more to read. But, Subdeacon, I'd like to get your thoughts, because if imagery utilized, because this is the main complaint that we hear, imagery utilized in a religious context should not be done. And don't come back and tell me, this is one argument I don't want to hear. Well, where are the examples of them bowing down? Not all. There are many kinds of veneration. You don't have to just bow down to give veneration. And I've heard that argument utilized, Subdeacon, that, well, you need an example in the early church of somebody bowing down, giving proskuneo. There are many ways of giving honor and veneration. Not every single person needs to bow down to give honor and veneration. That is a bad argument. Wouldn't you agree, Subdeacon?
Absolutely. This is my point earlier about diversity in communion. Again, within Oriental Orthodoxy and even within the Catholic communion with regarding the Eastern rites, because it's so diverse, right? There's like Coptic Catholic, Ethiopian Catholic, Syriac Catholic. So you have a bunch of different kinds of Catholics, but in Oriental Orthodoxy, you see it also, where you will have what William is saying of this bowing down to icons. Let's say the Alexandrian rite of St. Clement of Alexandria or the Coptic Church. You'll see it. It's a Hellenic expression of veneration. Whereas in the Syriac Church, you will see a more Semitic emphasis. And if whoever is familiar with these cultures, they would know. In the Semitic case, it's a more sensitive issue. So, and because of that, you'll see a diversity in the expression of these things. In the Syriac Church, you won't see people bowing down in front of icons or images. But in the Coptic Church, you will see it, and the two churches are in communion together. So it's like the apostles when they spread the faith, like St. Paul said, he said, with the Greek, I'm a Greek. With the Jew, I'm a Jew, right? And he had Timothy circumcised for the sake of preaching to that community.
Yeah.
So with each one of us, we preserve the apostolic faith according to the expression of that people. It's not like one conformed way of doing everything.
And I think that to me, Subdeacon, the fact that you you drew that distinction early on is a really important one, because I frequently hear even our Catholic brothers and sisters get confused, and they'll say, well, okay, well, I'm having trouble fulfilling their demand of finding an actual reference of somebody falling down and bowing. Well, don't confine yourself and believe that is the only kind of way to give veneration. That really is important. I think that's probably the most important point. The other point being that we agree with now a number of, and I don't know why he does this, a number of quotes, and we'll look at them later, that Gavin does read come from a number of early fathers, Justin the Martyr, Arnobius, and many others, Athenagoras, where they will, the early fathers will condemn people for believing that there's actually that the actual statue or what have you is an actual deity. I mean, I sometimes wonder why these arguments get raised, because us apostolic Christians, we don't believe that our artwork or our statues or our paintings or our icons are actual deities. We don't worship them as in Exodus 20 they were worshiping the golden calf. I think that's a very poor argument that gets brought up. But I think it gets brought up because they don't have anything else, Deacon. What are your thoughts?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's totally out of, if anyone with eyes who reads that part in Exodus, are going to understand. It said, nothing in heaven or on earth or under the earth.
Yeah.
Okay, well, they're taking the in heaven to be about saints, but in heaven is talking about birds here in the sky, because they're talking about animals, the polytheistic religion of ancient Egypt.
Yeah,
that's what it's talking about. And then and then the whole calf thing that happens. So with us, this is something completely unrelated. This section is not applicable to our conversation. First of all, we're not worshiping images, just like you said.
Yep.
Second of all, the context that's about is about actual created like animal creatures that the Egyptians were worshiping and that had impacted the Jews, the Hebrews, when they were slaves there. That has nothing to do with Christianity.
That's a great point you bring up there, because they will point to Exodus 20 where and they'll read the commandment condemning the utilization of idols. And then, I'm sorry, I thought I heard the doorbell ring. But then we look at Exodus 32, and directly in Exodus 32, we're told why these idols are condemned. So Deacon, what do they say in Exodus 32? This is your God that brought you out of the land of Egypt, about the golden calf. That is idolatry, and that is rightly so. That is condemned. But then there's a proper utilization of images, and we see here in St. Clement of Alexandria, where he says here, if it is necessary for us, while engaged in business or discharging other avocations in the country, and often away from our wives, to seal anything for the sake of safety, he, the Word, allows us a signet for this purpose only. He's talking about the Christians, let our seals be either a dove, and we know the dove very often represented the Holy Spirit, or a fish, or a ship scudding before the wind, or a musical lyre, which Polycrates used, or a ship's anchor, which Seleucus got engraved as a device. And if there be one fishing, he will remember the apostle. So the utilization of these images is to call to mind holy aspects of the life of Christianity. And the children drawn out of the water. For we are not to delineate the faces of idols. We are prohibited to cleave to them, nor a sword, nor a bow, following as we do peace, nor drinking cups, being temperate. So there are proper ways of utilizing imagery. There are proper ways of having images. And then there are ways which the early Christians thought were not good, which they thought were idols. There's clearly a difference there, which you also find in St. Methodius of Olympus, who says in his discourse on the resurrection, for instance, then, the images of our kings here, even though they be not formed of the more precious materials, gold or silver, are honored by all. For men do not, while they treat with respect those of far more precious material, slight those of a less valuable, but honor every image in the world, even though it be of chalk or bronze, and one who speaks against either of them is not acquitted as if he had only spoken against clay, nor condemned for having despised gold, but for having been disrespectful towards the king and Lord himself. Here's the good part. The images of God's angels, which are fashioned of gold, principalities and powers, we make to his honor and glory. Isn't that the whole point of Ezekiel 41 and anywhere in temple imagery? Anything done beautifully is to give honor and glory to God, ultimately, subdeacon. Isn't that the point?
Absolutely. I think that this topic, and I think maybe all the topics are connected. So if someone has an issue with venerating icons, I think there's a bigger issue. It stems from something else. So like, would that person also have a problem, say, if Virgin Mary was sitting in front of him? Would that person have a problem to kiss her feet? If yes, then yeah, they're going to have a problem with venerating icons. Does that person have a problem with the Eucharist? Is his Eucharistic theology wrong? Does he have a problem with venerating the Eucharist? If yes, then he will have a problem with venerating icons. So it's all connected, these things.
Yeah.
If you know the grace that God has given us through his church, through his priesthood, through his sacraments, then nobody will have to convince you to venerate icons. You will want to venerate the icons because you'll be so thankful for this grace that he has given to you, that it's like you become one family with all these saints, and then the icons are pictures of your family. So why would it's part of me now? It's not something against me that I have to go and do as an obligation. This is my family, so of course I want to venerate.
Great point there. Great point. Go ahead, brother. Go ahead, Sam.
Oh, just let me chime in real quick. I won't do much of that.
Definitely.
You've been great. I just want to clarify some confusion from some people, because they think even when I say veneration or worship, that the two words cannot be used synonymously, interchangeably. They have to be different. Let me explain this to a brother who's sincerely looking.
Definitely.
Even when you use the term worship, it depends on why you're worshiping. In other words, if I worship someone because I believe he's God and he's not, that's idolatry. So I want everyone to listen to this, because I'm going to give you a biblical basis for this. But the same Bible uses the term for worship, which in Hebrew would be ishtichava or shachah. John Pacheco, I haven't forgotten you, brother. I promise you I want to bring you on. Or in Greek, proskuneo. Those same terms are used in contexts where people are giving that to human creatures with God accepting it, because they're not doing it with the attitude that those human creatures are divine. I'm going to give you one example. So I just want to clear this up, because people get confused. Well, what's the difference between worship and veneration? Well, typically when we say worship, we're talking about giving honor to God as God, which you can't give to a creature. Veneration is when we honor someone who's used mightily of God. But even those words can be used synonymously. So here, 1 Chronicles 29:20. I want everyone to listen to this. Go check the Hebrew and the Greek. Same word. Please, guys, listen to this. 1 Chronicles 29:20. And David said to all the congregation, now bless Yahweh, the Lord your God. And all the congregation blessed Yahweh, the Lord God of their fathers, and bowed down their heads and worshipped Yahweh and the king. Did everyone see it? They not only bowed down to God, they bowed down to God and King David. And it says they worshiped both God and David. Same word. Hebrew, shachah, yishtachava, Greek, proskuneo. And God blessed it. God accepted it. Why? Because the Israelites knew, I'm bowing down to, quote unquote, worship David, not as God, but as God's anointed king. Whereas I'm bowing down and I'm worshiping God as God and the God of David. So you can use veneration in a sense in which where I'm honoring someone because of his status with God, or I'm venerating God as God. Don't get hung up on the terms. So anyway, I just want to make that clear.
Great point.
If I can just add too, in the liturgy, when the deacon for the Syriac traditions, the deacon census, whether subdeacon or a deacon or a leader. So when he's sensing, he turns around to the people and he senses the people too and the other deacons. The reason why he senses them is because that we are, in addition to sensing the altar, sensing the Eucharist, and the sensing being for God, we sense the people because we're venerating even the people because they're baptized and redeemed and God is living in them.
Yeah.
So they are now venerated. We're venerating them in the liturgy. John 17, I think it's John 17. Please, guys, correct me if I'm wrong. I think he says, the glory which I had with you, Jesus talking to the Father, in the beginning, I give to them.
John 17:22.
Oh, wow.
This eternal glory that he has with his Father, he's giving it to the disciples. And he says in another place, I think in the Old Testament, I don't know, he says, I do not share my glory with anyone. So
Isaiah
he's saying,
42, verse 8, Isaiah 48:11. Isaiah 42, verse 8, Isaiah 48:11.
and now he's giving it to the apostles.
Wow.
Glory.
That truly is incredible. That's a really good point there, Subdeacon and Sam. This has been incredibly edifying. I hope the audience are enjoying this as well, because these are really important points that when we gather together and we put our apostolic brains together, we really realize the beauty of the apostolic faith. And people that are wondering, that are inquiring, that feel that the faith is really being challenged and they really feel like the faith is being attacked. I hope they're really getting a lot out of this, because there's one other thing gets brought up a lot. And part of my delay, number one, my mother was sick. Number two, I got back, and it takes time to do what I really put a lot of effort and time into doing scholarly work. And I told Subdeacon Daniel, can't think of anybody better that I would love to join me here. But before we did that, as I told Sam, I've really had a lot of interest in Elvira for a long time, many years. Now, I want to be very clear. I've been doing apologetics for a long time. I don't even have hair anymore. I had hair back when I started doing them. Funny enough, John Pacheco, who's in the audience, it was him at the Catholic Legate that really got me my first start into apologetics a long time ago. So it's a real thrill and a blessing to see John there in the crowd, a real warrior for the faith. John, in case people don't know, is one of the foremost and greatest defenders of the pro-life movement, and he will always have a special part and a place in my heart. He's a near and dear brother to me. But Elvira, I looked at Elvira many years ago when I was a little baby in apologetics. I'm not a little baby anymore, now I'm an old man. But when I heard that Dr. Ortlund was utilizing Elvira, the number one thing that came to my mind, and it came to Sam's mind as well, because we know every argument from James White under the sun. James has used Elvira as well. I really think the only person who I've debated who has been too smart to use Elvira has been Turretin-Fan. I got a tip of the hat. I remember in one debate with Turretin-Fan, I tried to cross-examine him and utilize Elvira, and the guy's like, I'm not using that argument. I didn't use that argument. So he's smarter than to utilize Elvira. We're going to see why today. And I know Elvira is not an ecumenical council. Nobody argues it is. But the argument from Protestants goes like this. Elvira condemned images. And if in early church history, it was important enough to gather at one point and forbid images, what are you all doing today? Elvira Canon 36 forbids religious art, and it says, pictures are not to be placed in churches so that they do not become objects of worship and adoration. Look, I know every argument under the sun. I know them all. I know the Catholic defense, which will come out and say, well, it was at a period of time where there was pagan idolatry. Or I know the other argument that, well, the reason they condemned them, the reason they prevented them was so that they would not be, desecrated. I've heard every kind of argument under the sun. I've heard them all. You've heard them all, right? As well, Sam.
Okay,
you know them.
Sure. You can see Subdeacon Daniel how he's excited about Ortlund's argument. He's yawning. Dude, did you guys catch it?
He knows them as well. He's heard them.
Dude, we got to deal with this guy Ortlund and the issue of Elvira.
Yep.
All right. So go ahead.
No, that's right. He's heard them. So let me get the timestamp, because remember the last time we did a show and I got the one little tiny detail wrong. I don't want to get any little details wrong. So let me put the clip from actually from Dr. Ortlund. I am no longer going to cite him without actually putting the video.
There's a couple of issues that
I want to be fair to him. So it's at the 30-minute mark, I believe. And again, all Protestants love bringing
scorn
up
and pour contempt upon this idea. He quotes a proverb to compare it to, basically when you're looking, and yet makes supplications. That's his metaphor to say it's to pray to, and but people will try to find all these ways to get you.
Okay, here we go.
The image. So again, it's like unfathomable to think that Arnobius would be arguing like this if the theology of Nicaea II, that what's given to the image passes to the prototype, had been alive in his day. And that's the linchpin of iconophile theology. We could go on. I haven't even gotten to Canon 36 of the Synod of Elvira yet. Early 4th century says pictures are not to be placed in churches, so they do not become objects of worship and adoration. It's like, okay, that seems pretty clear, right? But people will try to find all these ways to get around this.
So I'm glad I put that up, because earlier today, a brother reached out to me and told me that he, and his name was Alex Gerardo, by the way, tip of the hat to him. He told me, William, I reached out to Gavin about the problems of Elvira, and Gavin seemed to not be aware of them. But, you know, as I've been teasing the audience for a long time, you know, enough teasing from the audience, because what I went ahead and I did was I went ahead and I dug in. I talked to 3 different scholars, 2 Spaniard, and I talked to a German one. And I was able to talk to each of these scholars, and I was able to ask each of them their opinions on Elvira. Well, people may stop and they may wonder, well, William, you know, what value is their particular opinion? Well, they're actually scholars that have studied Elvira. They've written on Elvira. One of them wrote a whole book just on Elvira and all of the canons. And the 3 that I talked to, all of them have studied every single canon of Elvira. Interestingly, a little bit disappointing is one of them, who I interviewed, granted me the interview. Unfortunately, it was all in Spanish, but good thing is I can speak multiple languages. And I have got a few timestamps the audience might enjoy. Now, for your eyes, before anyone else, as I told Sam, I said, Sam, we're going to do a really special show. That's never been done before. So before anyone else sees, for your eyes, we have got before us a very fun show. Now, we're going to go to the 4-minute mark where we begin. The gentleman who I interview has written a full book just on Elvira, and we'll look at 3 little clips. I will allow him to speak in the clip as is recorded in the interview with him, and I will pause after about a minute, and I will translate everything for the audience. Now, if there's anybody watching that knows Spanish, great for you. If you don't worry. I'll tell you what he said afterwards. You'll probably be able to catch a few things he says. At the 4-minute mark, I ask him, who are you? Exactly what is it you do? He's going to reply and let me know he has a doctorate. He's a scholar. He's written the whole book just in Elvira right here. Yeah, hay mucha gente que lee cosas sobre el Concilio de Elvira, pero no hay mucha información que puedes encontrar en inglés. Y I tell them, there's a lot of people that read about Elvira, but there's a lot of information out there in English, and there's not. There's virtually nothing online in English scholarly on Elvira. There's nothing. All I have ever been able to find is in German and Spanish. By the grace and luck of God, I know both languages, and I can read both of them. And in particular, a ton has been done in German and Spanish. Y usted ha escrito un libro todo sobre este concilio, ¿verdad?
Sí, sí, un mono.
I asked him, you've actually written a full book just on the Council of Elvira. And he says, yes, I have.
Gráfico exactamente sobre el concilio.
¿Y nos puedes decir un poquito sobre el trabajo que hace usted? ¿Eres un académico? ¿Eres un teólogo? Un poquito sobre...
Sí, bueno, soy licenciado en Historia, máster en Patrimonio Histórico y Arqueológico.
Let me cut to the chase. I asked him, what are you? The guy's a mega scholar. He's a historian. He's a scholar. Okay, we've got that out of the way. He's a scholar. He's looked at every canon of Elvira. He's written a whole book on it. And by the way, I know people that are translating that book he's written into multiple other languages. Cool deal. We get to the fun part at the 11-minute mark of this video, where I ask him right here. ¿Hay problemas con los documentos o los documentos están en... O sea, cuando pregunto si hay problemas, ¿hay diferencias en... Yo sé que hay varios concilios que... So what I ask him, and for people that are watching, they're saying, William, your Spanish is terrible. Hey, give me a little bit of a break. At least I was able to communicate with him. I ask him, are there any problems with the documents from Elvira? Because what I want to know, and by the way, the guy, I felt bad for the guy. I did a whole show just on Elvira, but all I really cared about was Canon 36. But I mean, we spent a lot of time there. I asked him, well, you know, are there any problems with this particular Council of Elvira? Podemos ver en griego o en latín y vemos que hay diferencias cuando vas a los 300 o los 400 o los 500 o... ¿Sí me entiendes la pregunta?
Sí, bueno, en este caso la controversia principal se trata en el número de cánones excesivos, ¿no?
Okay. The problem that we encounter with Elvira, he tells us, is primarily the number of canons with Elvira is what we run into. That is the problem we run into.
Para la época. Entonces, los investigadores piensan que parte de estos cánones se trata de lo que llaman pseudocánones, ¿no? Los pseudocánones.
Well, did you all catch that? Pseudo-canons, he says. One of the problems with Elvira are the pseudo-canons. Now, you don't need to be a scholar to know what pseudonymous means or what pseudo means. They mean canons that are not part of a council, that were either added later or who knows where on earth they came from. He tells me flat out, one of the problems with Elvira are the pseudo-canons. A lot of scholars point that out.
Y liberitanos, ¿no? Porque el nombre de Elvira se trata de un nombre musulmán.
As you heard that, the name given there comes from Muslims. It is not even originally, it wasn't even originally called Elvira. That name was attached later. This council was lost to history, completely lost. By the way, a number of canons from this council were absorbed into Toledo, the Council of Toledo. The thing is, you would kind of expect if Elvira's Canon 36 was a real canon, why didn't Toledo know about it? Why didn't that appear in the Council of Toledo?
Bueno, Elvira sería o bien la misma ciudad de Granada, sería Iliberis, no Elvira. Elvira es un nombre árabe. Entonces este sería el concilio de la iglesia, disperso por distintas iglesias, desde la Galaecia hasta la Bética.
Muy bien. Y cuando, this is the most important part. Pay attention to this. This is the cherry on the top. Cuando tocamos sobre el tema de pseudo-canones, hay varios personas, teólogos. I tell them, when we touch upon the topic of pseudo-canons, there are a number of scholars that only believe the first 20 or 20-some canons are from Elvira. Doctores de teología, que hay algunos que dicen que los primeros 21 canones son parte de Elvira, y algunos piensan que los otros son pseudo-canons. Estás hablando sobre eso, ¿verdad? Cuando usted dice... Notice his affirmation. I point blank ask him. I tell him, I know there are a number of scholars, by the way, I list them, a number of them, that only believe the first 20-some canons are from Elvira. And I tell him, when you talk about pseudo-canons, is that what you're referring to? He says, yes. Yes. That's exactly, and look, let me be very clear, and I'll get your thoughts on this. I want to get your thoughts on this, Subdeacon, because we don't even need to go and read the other canons if what he's affirming And many other scholars are affirming that after the first 20, others are pseudo-canons. Many people believe that. Canon 36 is believed to be a pseudo-canon as well. Why on earth would people continue to utilize Canon 36 if there are so many scholars that contest and do not believe it is a legitimate canon? I've got to say, brother, and I'm not accusing Gavin of being dishonest. I'm just pointing out how people are not really doing their homework, and that really is a problem, isn't it, brother?
Absolutely. I think there's something more to it. Like you're saying, if it was real, it would have been picked up by Toledo. Absolutely. Toledo is important for the West, right?
Yep.
Here's another thing, though. The person is not taking into account, again, the concept of diversity and particular issues that are particular to that community at that time, even if it's real.
Right,
so
correct.
In the Syriac tradition, you have from the earliest I can find, 2nd century, which probably means it was there in the 1st century, 2nd century issues in the Syriac communities, like Mesopotamia, of angel worship, okay? Mm-hmm. And we see that in the 3rd century and the 4th century and the 5th and the 6th. Tatian mentions it in the 2nd century. Aphrahat mentions it later. Ephraim mentions it. Jacob, Severus. It continues to be mentioned. It was a problem forever in the Syriac Christian community, Syriac church, both sides of the border. This is why, till today, there is not veneration officially. They're not against it, but there's not in the actual prayers, in the prayers of the church and the devotions, the liturgy, the naming of parishes. There is not the veneration of angels in the Syriac tradition, even until this day. Right. The other Oriental Orthodox have it, and we have no problem with them that they have it, and we can personally do it privately. But in the liturgical prayers, we don't have it because our community had such an issue with angel worship, okay, for all of history. So maybe in that time, if the Elvira canon was real, it's real, maybe in that time, that particular Spanish community in southern Spain, I think it is, maybe that community had an issue where that synod was. It doesn't mean this is an ecumenical council that takes the world, you know? So this someone can't take this canon and say, this violates the entire apostolic tradition. No, because these are local situations for the faithful in these areas.
Yep. That is a really, really good example. And I think that because I do want to be very clear and I want to be very fair, because I can already anticipate Gavin coming back and saying, well, William, maybe Gavin will do homework and realize, well, William, there are some scholars that believe it to be real and legitimate. I don't doubt that. Even the guy that I did the show with very clearly puts that forth. The very big difference is it's very contested. Thus, you have got to note that when doing any kind of scholarly work, if I'm going to utilize a quote from an early father, for instance, I believe Basil 360, the letter, I believe that to be real, but I don't utilize it as real because I know it's contested, the one in Images. So if you're going to be doing scholarly work, trying to refute the apostolic churches, you better really do deep work, because eventually out there are going to be a few people that are going to really dig in and do the work, and they're going to bust these kinds of arguments. I don't think Elvira is good either which way, either whether it's spurious. Number one, it's very hotly contested with many believing it to be a pseudo-canon. I don't believe it's from Elvira, but your point, Subdeacon, it's a great one. Even if it were to be a valid one, you'd have to look at the context of the time. You'd have to look at as to why they added the canon. And we really, if it was real or legitimate, we'd have no idea why. Let me add one other point, Subdeacon, and I forgot to bring it up. Let me get your thoughts on this. It's very hard finding anything on Elvira. I asked two different scholars, do we know the names of the bishops that were there at Elvira? And two of them told me, we know them. And I asked them, okay, do we know if any of them were anti-icon, anti-imagery? And the reply from both were, there's no evidence any of them were against images or icons. That is a real blow against Elvira, don't you think?
Sure. And again, I think whoever is studying these things needs to make a distinction between faith versus morals versus canons that are pastoral. Pastoral canons of, like, the function of the community and what is bound and loosed. These can be, bound and loosed over time, different canons. But when we're talking about dogma or morals, this is not that here. Okay, this is a particular a pastoral canon for a particular community, if it's true,
right?
So then we have the canons such as, like, regarding things like marriages of priests or deacons or all of these things. These are pastoral canons. They're not about dogma. So I think people they're not making these distinctions when they're looking at these things. They're just grabbing at whatever that is kind of looks obvious to them and supports their view, and then they disregard all of these kind of these things that are important for historical context,
Yeah. No, I completely agree, and I agree. I think that people have got to do better digging, do better work. On his video on icons, the particular brother that I mentioned earlier, Alex, he posted a screenshot that I want to share right now. I want to show you, and it really to me it gets to the particular heart of the issue there, because if we look at it. Alex tells you there, and you got to kind of zoom in there. Alex tells you right towards the bottom, it says to Gavin, you appeal to Canon 36 of Elvira, which is a standard Protestant objection. And then he asks him towards the bottom there if he's aware of the fact that there are a number of scholars that believe only the first few are legitimate. Now, this by the way, was a video done over a year ago. And Gavin continued doing videos since then. He replies to them and telling them, well, okay, we disagree about Elvira, whatever. But then you go down and he says, could you point to any evidence that only canons 1 to 21 are authentic? Now, here is my concern here, Subdeacon. My concern is Gavin has done these videos, puts forth the information as if he's actually done the scholarship, as if he's actually done the research. Now, this has been over a year ago. It was pointed out to him a year ago, the problems with these canons. And yet he did a video not long back, maybe a month ago or less, repeating the very same argument, even though it was pointed out to him that these canons are contested. My advice to Gavin in a friendly way were to be, do your digging and do your research. If somebody points out that something is hotly contested, could be pseudonymous, my recommendation to you is dig into that a little bit better. And I don't think he did a good job in Elvira in particular. And maybe he'll come back and say, well, you know what, I don't really care that much about Elvira. But the issue is that for a lot of Protestants, Elvira really is important. And when we look at Gavin's arguments, Subdeacon, I can't help but think about a friend of ours. And when I say friend, I say in a very tongue-in-cheek kind of way, who brings forth something very interesting. Now, we're going to get to hear what Dr. White has to say. This is what I've been pointing out for the longest time. Now, I appreciate James White, his statements here, because to me, they really do get to the heart of the issue. I want people to hear what James White says here in this particular clip. And the reason I want people to hear what James White has to say in this particular clip is because I've been saying it for the longest time. Apostolic Christians, don't be taken in by these arguments. We've heard them. We've been hearing them for many years. There's nothing new here that you've heard. Is there anything new you've heard here, Subdeacon?
Oh, nothing.
No, there's nothing new here. Now, if Sam, brother, if you can share that, I put there we
Trent
go.
Horn and Jim.
Great. Now, the Dr. White, James White, has something very interesting to say. Now, his comment really does, to me, get to the issue. Let's hear it.
Jimmy Akin did a video responding on the issue of, oh, man, I responded last night, and I should have pulled it up. Sorry. On the subject of veneration of icons and images and stuff like that. And I'm sitting here watching this going back and forth. A bunch of people on the Protestant side and other side going back and forth. And I'm sitting here going, man, There's nothing new under the sun.
No. Now, people wonder why I shared that clip. There's nothing new being presented here. And I say that, I'm not insulting Gavin. There's nothing new being presented here. There's no new material. There's nothing compelling that will say, whoa, wow, Gavin really is blowing me out of the water. It's everything you've heard before. In a little bit, we'll look at more. It's Arnobius, it's Elvira, it's Origen, it's Tertullian. There's nothing new here. Catholics, Orthodox, our Oriental brothers, why is anybody being blown away, or why is their faith being shaken, or people that are catechumens, why are they being shocked? There's nothing new. Is there anything new here to you, brother?
No, and it's like, okay, you wanna pick like this obscure synod in Spain in 314.
Yeah.
Why don't you? What about all the stuff before that? What about what Ignatius said about the Eucharist? What about what Clement said about apostolic succession? What about baptism? Do you agree with us on all of these things? We'll talk about icons after. But you're pretending like you're holding to this synod. You don't even know what a synod is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, they want to hear James White speak Greek, so I'm going to do a James White Greek impersonation, guys. You ready? The people who speak Greek here, when they hear James White doing the Erasmian way of speaking Greek,
They love it.
okay, so here, I'm going to do one real quickly for you guys. Kuriasmu kai ha theasmu. I pin out two. Kuriasmu kai ha theasmu. All right.
Or when James White says Theotokos. Theotokos. Man, I got to say there's no better butchering than the butchering of Greek from James White. But either which way, we got to look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no better butchering than the kind of butchering we get from James White. So let me go right back to, here we go. Let me go right back to the early fathers slides that we were looking at. These, there is another one. Where was it? There's another interesting one. St. Jerome talks about images on cups, but there was we'll look at Augustine in a bit. St. John, and yeah, I got a lot. So people wondering, yeah, we've got this one. This is one I really liked. This is one I was not very well aware of. It was pointed out, a Syriac Catholic pointed me to this quote. I had said, well, I there's a lot out there not translated from St. Cyril, a lot not in English. So I said, I'm going to have to go to the Patrologia, look it up, see if this is legitimately from St. Cyril. It is. I went, double checked. It is in the Minier. It is there. This is a great one, Sadiq. I'd love to get your thoughts. And maybe let me add one other thing for the audience that may be wondering why I picked a number of the fathers I did. In particular, I picked, there's tons of them, but I picked the ones that I thought were the most important, those that had a magnificently great Christology, those that had a beautiful view of the Trinity. Because if you then look at, in my opinion, St. Cyril is one of the greatest Christologists ever. I don't think anyone would argue that. I think any of the apostolic faiths are going to agree St. Cyril is one of the greatest Christologists of all time. And if you disagree with that, I would really recommend you read St. Cyril's work. I really, really would. Well, you would definitely agree with me on that, right, brother? One of the greatest Christologists?
If not the greatest, yeah.
Right, yeah, no doubt. if not the greatest. So the reason I picked these particular men, I want people to realize it, is because these great figures were such giants and pillars of the faith that if they have this to say about images and icons, and they were giants of the faith in all these other key areas, St. Cyril being a prime mover of Ephesus, of perfect Christology, it really tells you how important this is. St. Cyril says, even if we make images of pious men, it is not so that we might adore them as gods, but that when we see them, we might be prompted to imitate them. And if we make images of Christ, it is so that our minds might wing aloft in yearning for him. This is exactly what Sadiq Daniel has been talking about. This is exactly what I have been talking about as well. None of these images are idols. We don't make them. St. Cyril, what does he say? We're not making idols. We don't worship them. We're not making them to adore them. as of their gods, the way the Gentiles did. It's very clear. It is to draw our minds closer to the Lord, to yearn and to desire to be with the Lord. You know what I've noticed, Subdeacon? I've noticed that when you find people, when you look at figures like Eusebius, Tertullian, and many others that people might point to being very against images, you then find them also having a very poor Christology. Eusebius, we know, had a poor
100%.
Christology.
100%. Yeah.
But also this important point, in that what blows me away is that you read not only the Christology of St. Cyril, but his beautiful Eucharistic theology. And then you stop and you think that so many of our evangelical friends that have such a really, really low view of images and icons also have a very poor view of the Holy Eucharist and of Christology. It really goes hand in hand, doesn't it, brother?
Yeah, I mean, it's all you got to do is ask them, why don't you believe Mary is the mother of God? And then there's the connection right there.
Yeah.
And it all goes back to the whole Saint Cyril thing again. Exactly, it's inseparable from the icons with Christology, and then Christology also in a general sense the human condition of how humanity was redeemed, because that is why they can't accept the saints in icons too. But I think someone in the comments was talking about maybe it was you probably mentioned it too, like the temple environment, the church environment. Right. Why is God commanding his people in the Old Testament to do this kind of thing? Is because it's a holy setting. Like it's supposed to be pointing you to one direction. Whoever has been into an Eastern Orthodox parish or the Catholic parishes that are like more traditional, or even Oriental, for us Oriental Orthodox parishes, the whole thing is structured to point you to Christ in the Eucharist. That's the whole point of everything. It's not about like white walls and you're there for a lecture. It's like a university where the guy is trying to teach you something and you're taking notes. It's not why we're there. We're there to worship, and we're all the church in heaven and on earth are being united together. And just like Revelation says, there's an altar and there's chanting and there's incense and there's deacons around the altar, and everybody's facing the same direction together, praying together. The priest is praying on behalf of us. We're all one body with him, united in heaven with that church, offering to Christ, who is on his altar, aka his throne. One worship, one sacrifice. It says, I think in Revelation 5, the prayers of the saints go into the hands of the elders.
Revelation 5 verse 8. And then you also find Revelation 8, 3-5. An angel brings the prayers. Revelation 5 verse 8, Revelation 8 verses 3-5. Go ahead.
Thank you, Sam. So it's in the hands of, so why are our prayers ascending into the hands of the elders in heaven, not to Christ directly? Because that worship is being collected as one cumulative worship offered as one thing to God by who's ever offering, let's say St. Peter or whoever it is, offering the prayers, you know?
That is a great example. And I think that to me is perhaps the most important point, because there's another council that Gavin points to, and it is the Council of Hieria. Depends how you want to pronounce it. Now, a number of Protestants point to that particular council, which was never considered ecumenical, and that particular council gets pointed to because their images and icons were anathematized. Now, this council preceded Nicaea. It falsely called itself ecumenical. It was never, ever considered such. And a number of things must be pointed out. I love your perspective on Christology, because it is so important, Subdeacon.
Thank you.
It really is so important. An area where we really are on the same page. And this is where we agree. This is a big problem. There's a reason why Hieria was never considered an ecumenical council, because at this council, the emperor would erroneously attack icons based upon a poor understanding of Exodus 20, all the while promoting that the Eucharist was an acceptable alternative. But the other problem was this particular Constantine, I don't remember if it was the 5th or the 6th, his Christology was Monophysite. He had a terrible Christology. And additional evidence of his faulty Christology was his rejection of the word Theotokos. He did not want that word utilized. It was not acceptable to him. But there are numerous other biblical problems with the council, which is why I don't get why Protestants point to it and say, well, look, we can get on board with this one, but we can't get on board with Nicaea too, because rightly so, the interpretation of 2 Corinthians 5:16 is blasphemous in that at that council, numerous fathers from there, and I don't even want to call them fathers, argue that post-resurrection, the humanity of Christ is completely done away with. The iconoclasts argue that Christ post-resurrection is only divine. They also come to the conclusion that the false flesh of the saints in heaven cannot be depicted in any kind of art, and much less can the holy saints be venerated as their humanity is gone post-resurrection. What is more telling than anything else is that the iconoclasts, and I'd love your thoughts on this, brother, clearly oppose the definitions of all the previous ecumenical councils and adopt heretical Christology. When I talk about the previous ecumenical councils, I'm clearly referring to Nicaea, Constantinople, Ephesus, and if you are denying those other Christological councils, well, then very clearly you cannot consider yourself ecumenical. There's a reason why this council was never considered ecumenical. That's a big problem, isn't it, brother?
Sure. Someone can't reject Nicaea and Constantinople and call himself a Christian. It doesn't work.
Right.
So if Hieria, the Council of Hieria, if a Protestant is thinking that he accepts the Council of Hieria, well, Hieria claims to be the faith of the fathers. It's not,
right,
but claims to be. Okay, so if Hieria is claiming all the church fathers before it, the Chalcedonian church fathers and then pre-Chalcedon, so someone who is subscribing to the Council of Hieria has to subscribe again to the entire tradition that existed before Hieria anyway, which is, again, priesthood, sacraments, liturgy, all that stuff. So you have a problem, Protestant. It's that either you accept Hieria and the tradition to which Hieria claims, which, again, it's wrong, but it claims, then you're kind of going to be on this island of being this apostolic Christian with not really, but without icons. Or there's 4 options that are currently available for you. Unfortunately, there are 4. There should be one. One day, maybe, God's will. But it's kind of funny how if the Protestants are really going around trying to pick these random synods through history, but disregarding the theological, historical, pastoral context in which these synods are existing anyway, that they're believing in things that Protestants don't believe in any case, even if they happen to reject icons. What about everything else that they accept? I'm pretty sure the Council of Hieria, I think I remember reading it once, I think it said something about asking for Mary's intercession and
it does,
Mother of God, things like that. So how can a Protestant even accept the Council of Hieria too?
No doubt.
Let me ask for some clarification because I come out of Protestantism. So Protestants understand what you just did. Guys, listen to this. So this Council of Hieria, which Hieria is now, Gavin Ortlund did appeal to this?
Yeah, he did. He did not claim that he would adopt everything from it, but he claimed that it was early evidence of an anti-icon council, and that it in essence kind of gets ignored by people.
So Gavin Ortlund has become his own pope, determining which parts of a council accept, reject. So that's number one. But number 2, as a Protestant, I was taught that we accept the Council of Nicaea, Council of Constantinople, as well as Council of Chalcedon, meaning that Protestants are supposed to be Diophysites, right? 2 natures in Christ, and there are 2 wills. But you just said, so everyone understands, that this Constantine who convened
Yeah.
was a monophysite, which is not the same as miaphysitism. Maybe
No.
explain that real quickly for people to understand. But before you do that, and they reject the title Theotokos, meaning that Protestants who appeal to this are appealing to heretics who condemn their own beliefs about Jesus and his two natures, and they're doing it inconsistently and dishonestly. Is that, am I getting it right?
Yeah.
You're 100% correct. Yes, without a doubt, you're 100% correct. And I would think that I think Subdeacon Daniel is perfect for describing. Because I have heard people accuse him of being monophysite before.
Explain the difference, and I'm going to receive.
Yes,
Daniel, remember,
can do that.
for us Protestants, this is new stuff. I sometimes mistakenly, without trying to be offensive, I'll say miaphysitism, monophysitism.
Yeah.
And I've had people correct me. Explain the difference and why
Sure. So,
this Constantine was a heretic, because monophysitism is not the same as miaphysitism.
right. So mono is implying a simple, whereas mia is implying a composite. So when we're saying miaphysis, we're saying one composite nature of Christ, one nature from the two, from divinity and humanity. He's both God, man at the same time.
Yeah.
Whereas mono is just a simple one.
Monos.
Usually the straw man is mono in that he's a simple divine. Certain Monophysite heretics would say he's this mixed, blended new nature that is neither man nor human. So in both of those cases, that's wrong. Monophysitism is wrong. There's no simple one nature after the union. It's one composite nature from the two. Yep. That's what miaphysis is. That's what St. Cyril taught, and that's what we believe.
Yeah, great point there, brother. That's great, and I'm glad that you broke it down that way. Excuse me, because a lot of people really do confuse the two, and I think that it's important to break that down because it is important to point out that that particular kind of Christology is heretical, was condemned, and I've heard people before claim St. Cyril was a monophysite, and that I can't help but laugh.
Who says that? That's crazy.
I've heard of it. You'd be surprised all the kinds of things that I get in in the sessions that the brother Sam and myself have done before, and which God willing we'll begin doing again soon. People have left all kinds of comments below. I mean, it's just, you can't keep up with all of them anymore. It's impossible to, but great points you make there. Now, what we're going to do right now is the screenshot you have here, and multiple ones we're going to look at. People are going to really kind of roll their eyes because you're going to realize we're going to read more of the same, where you've got guys like Augustine reading, but have they mouth and yet speak not? Have the eyes and see not? Do we pray into them? Because through them we pray to God. This is the chief cause of this insane profanity, that the figure resembling the living person, which induces men to worship it, hath more miserable influence in the minds of miserable persons. Over and over, we read Augustine, we read this one. Why do they endeavor with such pains to conceal and to cloak whatever they worship? Why have they no altars, no temples, no acknowledged images? Now, we're going to read tons of examples of early fathers, not tons, we'll read a few of them, where they're condemning idols over and over and over. You read Augustine, and you'll think, oh man, well, Augustine, anti-image. He was against images. But then when you read Augustine in context, Augustine is against idols. He's not against images or pictures, because he tells you, for Abraham to sacrifice his son of his own accord, is shocking madness. His doing so at the command of God proves him faithful and submissive. This is so loudly proclaimed by the very voice of truth that Faustus, eagerly rummaging for some fault and reduced at last to slanderous charges, has not the boldness to attack this action. It is scarcely possible, it's not possible, that Faustus could have forgotten an incredible deed like this, a famous one, that it recurs to the mind of itself without any study or reflection, and in fact is repeated by many tongues and portrayed in many places. If you look at the Latin, it literally means it is pictured. It is pictured in many places. This particular biblical event is pictured in many places. Now, on the one side, Augustine rightly does condemn idols and images, but on the idols and images that are considered idols, you don't worship a man believing that the man is the image. You don't worship a man, period. But then Augustine can show that images are utilized and in a religious context. Isn't that right, Subdeacon?
Absolutely. I think that if and with Augustine, William, like we're kind of we're not as familiar as you guys,
Right?
but,
Correct.
but and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I think Protestants, Calvinists especially, maybe they claim to be familiar with Augustine. Yeah,
They do.
Okay.
They do.
So then they should know, like they're reading their guy. Augustine's their guy. They claim him. So then he's saying it right there for them. I mean, I don't know. It's like they only take what they want. It's like a cafeteria or something. I'm not understanding.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. They'll only pick and choose what they want because when it then comes to Augustine's Eucharistic theology or Augustine's love for Holy Mary, and I could go on and on, Augustine's prayer for the dead and on, they're going to be very, not be very consistent because they're not going to take Augustine as a whole. That is a problem because we in turn can take an Augustine or an Ephraim where they'll talk about prayer for the dead, venerating Mary, and their Eucharistic theology. And we can imagine ourselves being at their time, hearing one of their beautiful sermons and being in accord with them. I cannot imagine a Protestant ever imagining that. I really cannot. It's a problem. And by the way, why do I put this quote from Minicius Felix? He's talking about idols here. There's not even a need to really go in depth here. There are many quotes like this that Gavin reproduces talking about idols. But then there are really selective little quotes Gavin posts. Very selective. Now, number one, we read Clement earlier. Subdeacon Daniel and myself, we read it and we talked about it. We realized that Clement of Alexandria was not talking about all idol, not all art. There are particular images that are acceptable, even religious images that he says are our images. But then Gavin in his video posts that one little clip from Clement without the full context. Well, what is the context of this quote here? Here it is. It were indeed ridiculous, as the philosophers say, for man, the plaything of God, to make God, and for God to be the plaything of art. This is the context where he says that works of art cannot then be sacred and divine. We agree. Subdeacon Daniel, do you have any images of Holy Mary in your home?
Yes.
Do you believe that image is divine?
No.
No, you don't. You don't. You have to laugh, don't you? You have to laugh. Because context, I want to be very honest, whether Gavin did it on purpose or he didn't, to me it really does seem a bit dishonest when you put the little tiny clip, said, oh, look, Clement of Alexandria, the guy was against images. Really? Well, all you got to do is go to newadvent.org where the whole thing is free and put the whole context. Because no, we do not believe in worshiping artwork. And as it says here, for man, the plaything of God to make God is really very blasphemous. We don't believe that any of these images are God. Otherwise, it would be the very same thing that was being done in the book of Exodus, where they were worshiping the golden calf. To me, Subdeacon Daniel, as I said, there really is nothing new under the sun. We've not read anything damning that should shock you. It's really, but they're bad arguments, aren't they?
Maybe what the problem is, like, so when we talk, William, me and you, Elijah gets on, Sam gets on, we have these conversations and we're all kind of there to answer for our parts of like, you have an Oriental Orthodox question, you ask me, I ask you the question, I ask you, whatever. Maybe the guy just doesn't have like an apostolic friend who he's asking, kind of bouncing these things off, and he's trying to figure this out for himself.
Yeah,
I don't know, but I think it would benefit him a lot to talk to us.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
and I don't want to throw it out there. Now I know Gavin has come out publicly and said that he won't engage with me personally because I'm a big old meanie. But Subdeacon Daniel, you're there, and at the end of his video, he said he would like to talk to a representative of Oriental Orthodoxy. In my opinion, I can think of no one better than you. And you have said already you would be willing to go on and have a friendly dialogue with them.
I would love to. I would love to. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt.
But the key is, I don't tell you, William, what you believe.
Right.
You tell me what you believe.
Of
And then
course.
I tell you what I believe. And I think that's where maybe some evangelicals go offline, is because they try to tell us what we believe, you know, but you don't ask us, let us tell you.